They didn't just ignore Jasmine Walker. They didn't just whisper behind her back. They wanted her to fail because that would prove she didn't belong in their prestigious conservatory. But on that fateful day, when the backstage echoed with urgent calls and no one dared step up to the piano, Jasmine walked out. They looked at her with contempt, with doubt, with mocking smiles. And yet, minutes later, they would be standing. They would be silent, and they would never forget her name. Are you ready to witness the moment a forgotten genius shatters every prejudice? Don't blink. This story is just beginning. Jasmine Walker walked quietly through the marble halls of Robertson Conservatory, passing beneath portraits of legendary pianists gazing down from gilded frames. Crystal chandeliers cast long shadows across the polished floors, shadows that marked the footsteps of the celebrated, the revered. But Jasmine's footsteps invisible. To them, she was just the admin assistant, a forgettable name on a tiny badge, a fleeting silhouette wiping dust off Steinway keys, hauling stacks of old sheet music, adjusting chairs after rehearsals. Jasmine, make sure the stage is spotless before the competition. Mrs. Whitmore, head of the piano department, ordered briskly as she swept past without even stopping. Jasmine nodded quietly, eyes downcast. To Whitmore, she wasn't even a person, just another piece of furniture. Probably just the janitor's kid. A blonde student sneered under her breath, giving Jasmine a once-over with a smirk. Jasmine heard it. She always did. But she never responded. Her hands kept moving, gently polishing each piano key like she was touching a memory. No one knew these were the same hands that once electrified Europe's grandest concert halls, that once made audiences rise to their feet, cheering until their palms were raw. 5 years ago, headlines blazed with her name. Prodigy Jasmine Walker breaks every barrier. Then, a car accident, a fractured arm, a dream everyone thought was gone forever. She vanished from the spotlight. No one knew where she'd gone. Now, she was the assistant in the conservatory's shadows. No questions asked. No one cared. That afternoon, while sorting a pile of old sheet music in the archives, Jasmine heard frantic voices in the corridor. Gregory can't perform, Professor Thornton's voice cracked with panic. He's burning up with a fever. Doctor says absolutely no performances tonight, a woman gasped. Oh my God, that's the headline act. Who the hell can play Liszt's transcription of Beethoven's Fifth now? Jasmine froze. She knew that piece. Knew it every note, every breath, every impossible leap Liszt demanded. It wasn't just a piece of music, it was a battlefield. Few dared to face it under the stage lights. Call Michelson, someone suggested. He's a violinist, not a pianist, Thornton snapped. There's no one left. Silence. So returned son. Heavy, hopeless silence. Jasmine stepped out of the archive room and looked toward the empty stage. The grand piano sat waiting, gleaming beneath a spotlight like it were holding its breath. A strange sensation surged through her, a flicker of fire she thought had died long ago. She reached out and touched the piano's lid. Memories flooded back. The roar of applause, the blinding lights, the thunder of orchestras, and the cold voice of a doctor. This arm may never play the same again. Her fingers curled into a fist. Her heartbeat pounded not from fear, but from an ache she hadn't dared feel in years. At the end of the hall, Whitmore whispered urgently with the directors, her face pale. Jasmine took a deep breath. She walked straight toward them. Professor, she said, calm but firm, if you need someone to perform the Liszt tonight, I volunteer. And 3 heads turned. Stunned, skeptical, smirking. You Whitmore let out a cold chuckle. An administrative assistant. You think this is a joke? No, ma'am, I'm serious. Thornton folded his arms. This is absurd. Tonight's performance isn't amateur hour. Do we have a better option? Thornton, Madame Dubois, the vocal coach, asked quietly, worry creasing her brow. At least, she's willing. Jasmine met their eyes, unwavering. Let me play. I promise, I won't disappoint you. Silence. A pause heavy as a lifetime. Fine, Whitmore said through clenched teeth. We've got no other choice. Jasmine nodded. She stepped toward the piano. The stage lights bathed her in their glow. Behind her, whispers rippled. Doubt. Laughter. Scoffs. But when Jasmine's hands touched the keys, no one in that room realized they were about to witness something beyond imagination. The whispers in the concert hall slowly faded as Jasmine Walker stepped onto the stage. A small figure in a simple blue dress, standing alone amidst the grandeur of Robertson Hall, a place that had welcomed legends. The spotlight poured down, illuminating her serene face. Those deep, steady eyes. In the front row, Mrs. Whitmore sat rigid, gripping the armrest, her gaze locked on Jasmine, torn between doubt and uneasy anticipation. Beside her, Professor Thornton shook his head repeatedly, leaning toward a fellow judge. This will be a disaster. An unknown assistant. How could she possibly? But Madame Dubois remained silent, her eyes never leaving Jasmine. There was something in that posture, something strangely familiar, an aura that couldn't be mistaken. Jasmine sat down at the piano, not rushed, not hesitant. She adjusted the bench, lifted the lid, and placed her hands on the keys as if she'd done it a million times. The hall fell into absolute silence. Even the coughs, the rustling, vanished. A deep breath. And then, the first note. Powerful. Mina de Fuenteventura. Commanding. The iconic bum 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 of Beethoven thundered from those seemingly delicate hands. No hesitation. No tremble. The keys responded to her touch like they'd been waiting for these hands to return all these years. The audience froze. People held their breath. A few heads turned, exchanging glances. What's happening? Someone whispered. But Jasmine didn't hear, didn't see. She had left the world behind, diving into the raging river of music. Chords erupted, furious runs, whispers of lyrical phrases like rolling winds. The entire Liszt transcription of Beethoven's Fifth, a piece that intimidated even masters, was being conquered, measure by measure. In the front row, Whitmore sat frozen, her face paling. No, it can't be, as she murmured. Thornton leaned forward, glasses slipping down his nose. I recognize this style. It's unmistakable. Madame Dubois gently covered her mouth, tears glistening in her eyes. My God, it's her! The music surged toward the climax. Jasmine led the audience through the thundering fortissimos, then softened into fragile pianissimos, every phrase deliberate. This wasn't a desperate gamble. This wasn't an understudy saving the night. This was the performance of a master. A backstage door creaked open. Gregory Palmer peeked out, still pale from fever, but his eyes were wide in shock. He stared, unblinking. It's really her. Throughout the hall, the audience leaned forward, drawn closer by this magnetic sound. Those who once dismissed her were now utterly captivated. It was that rare sensation, the feeling you were witnessing history. Jasmine entered the development section, the harmonies dancing freely under her fingers. All of it contained within this small figure, these hands once diagnosed as forever damaged. But now, those hands lived. Strong, bold, unbound. Madame Dubois leaned toward Thornton, voice soft. Do you remember that girl in Vienna, the 17-year-old who made all of Europe rise to its feet? Thornton swallowed hard. Walker, no, not Walker. Kurtz, Jasmine Kurtz. The name rippled like a wave across the hall. Jasmine Kurtz, no way. Is she the lost piano prodigy? She's returned. But Jasmine kept playing, never lifting her gaze, never seeking the crowd. There were no more sneers, no more whispers, no more wait. Only the music flowed like blood in her veins. And as she thundered through the blazing fugue, closing with a dazzling final chord, the hall fell silent. 1, 2, 3 heartbeats, then an explosion. Thunderous applause. Shouts of brava. The entire audience, on their feet. Jasmine closed her eyes, drew a long, deep breath, and bowed. She knew, tonight, everything had changed. As the applause still thundered through the hall, Jasmine Walker, or rather, Jasmine Kurtz, remained standing by the piano, head bowed slightly, eyes gently closed. She felt each wave of sound washing over her, like rhythmic knocks striking straight into her heart. In the front row, Professor Thornton stammered, hands trembling as he removed his glasses. It can't be. That's Jasmine Kurtz. I saw her perform in Berlin. I could never mistake her. Mrs. Whitmore sat frozen, her face pale as chalk. She's not just an assistant. Madame Dubois slowly rose amid the applause, her eyes shimmering with pride and emotion. Bravo, Jasmine, she whispered, yet her words carried far enough for the front row to hear. Jasmine raised her gaze, her deep black eyes sweeping the room. She saw astonished faces, doubting faces, then slowly transforming into admiration, reverence. Stage lights haloed around her, casting a glow as if an angel had descended. The clapping continued without pause. People stomped, shouted her name. Jasmine Kurtz, Dios sorna yura bien enconanon. The piano queen returns. She's back. Gregory Palmer stood hidden at the wing, eyes glistening with awe. He whispered, almost to himself, she's really her. I practiced that piece for a year, but I've never heard it like this. Amid the commotion, Dr. Whitmore stood abruptly, grabbing the microphone from the host, forcing a smile. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe an explanation is in order. The hall quieted. The spotlight centered on Whitmore and Jasmine. Miss Walker, or rather, Miss Kurtz, she began, trying to maintain composure. I believe everyone here is wondering, why would a renowned artist work at Robertson Conservatory as an assistant? All eyes turned to Jasmine. A tense, expectant silence filled the auditorium. Jasmine stepped forward, took the microphone. Her voice was low, steady, but firm. Because I chose to be here. I needed to find myself again, not as a performer, not as a name on posters, but as someone who simply loves music. A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. Some nodded in admiration. Some looked puzzled. So, you hid from us. Why, doctor? Me. Whitmore pressed. Jasmine smiled gently. I didn't hide. I simply didn't say, and because no one ever asked. Madame Dubois chuckled softly, nodding as if confirming a truth. Professor Thornton flushed, lowering his gaze. Do you realize how Robertson Conservatory treated you? Whitmore tried to salvage. I know, Jasmine replied. I heard every whisper behind my back. I saw every dismissive glance. I heard every, you're not good enough. Sure, and that's exactly why I stayed silent. Her gaze swept the audience, pausing on Madame Dubois. But she always wondered, always watched, and never judged. Madame Dubois smiled warmly, eyes glistening. A true artist doesn't need to boast. Their music speaks for them. Applause rose again, and not out of shock this time, but respect. Jasmine turned to Whitmore. Tonight, I didn't play to prove anything. I simply filled an empty seat, and music needed to be heard. Whitmore opened her mouth as if to speak, but then closed it. She knew no defense mattered anymore. From the crowd, an elderly man in a sharp suit stood up. I'm Robert Danson, director of the Danson Scholarship Foundation, he announced. Tonight, I came to scout young talent, but instead witnessed the return of a legend. Miss Kurtz, on behalf of our board, I'd like to invite you to serve as our artistic advisor. A collective gasp rippled across the hall. Jasmine smiled softly. Thank you, Mr. Danson, Sobrinieramun. But first, I wish to do something else. What would that be? He asked. Jasmine looked toward Gregory, then at the seated students watching in awe. I want to teach, you remain, Siriyawash. The hall erupted. Madame Dubois rose, leading a standing ovation. Gregory wiped away tears. And I want, Jasmine continued, everyone who's ever been dismissed, overlooked, told they weren't enough, to know this. Talent isn't about titles or status. Talent is what lives in your heart and deserves to be nurtured, no matter who you are. The applause surged like a tidal wave. Jasmine bowed deeply, her smile quiet, fulfilled. Tonight wasn't just a performance. It was a declaration. A homecoming, a beginning. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the music room window, casting a warm glow over Jasmine Walker, no, Jasmine Kurtz, who sat quietly at the piano, her fingers gently gliding over the keys as if speaking to an old friend. She hadn't slept much, not out of exhaustion, but because of an unfamiliar sense of freedom blooming inside her heart. A soft knock came at the door. Gregory Palmer peeked in, holding a stack of sheet music. Hope I'm not interrupting, ma'am, he asked shyly. Jasmine smiled and nodded. Not at all. Come in, Irakunuso. He stepped in hesitantly, as if afraid to disrupt the serenity of the moment. I still can't believe it, Gregory admitted, his voice hushed. You're really Jasmine Kurtz. Jasmine waved him closer. Just call me Jasmine, she said gently. In this classroom, titles don't matter. Only the music does. Gregory flushed, nodding earnestly. Yes, Jasmine. But can I ask why you came back? This way? Why not return to the big stage instead of here? Jasmine looked at the young man, her gaze carrying a wisdom far beyond her years. Because the stage, she answered quietly, can sometimes be a golden cage. Gregory, people clap, then they forget. But to teach someone, to change a soul, that's forever. Gregory bit his lip, thoughtful. Then he stepped closer to the piano. Will you help me with this passage? I keep messing it up. Jasmine rose and sat beside him. Of course. Even Eintum. But first, close your eyes. Listen. Don't look. He closed his eyes, letting the notes Jasmine played wash over him. They were unhurried, unshowy, pure sounds reaching deep within. When he opened his eyes, Jasmine rested a hand on his shoulder. Music isn't about beating anyone, she told him softly. Music is about telling a story. Your story. Gregory nodded, his eyes shining with new conviction. Out in the hall, Madame Dubois stood quietly, tears glistening in her eyes. Now I understand, she whispered. Why you came back, Jasmine? Suddenly, hurried footsteps approached. Dr. Whitmore appeared, her expression tense. Miss Kurtz, she began, trying to sound composed. The board just called. They'd like to offer you the position of Director of Piano Programs, a position we've never had before. Jasmine stood calmly. Why, she asked, it was her Surawian. Because they are clearly an invaluable asset to Robertson Conservatory. We can't afford to lose you. Jasmine was silent for a moment. Then she smiled faintly. I appreciate it. But if I accept, I have one condition. What condition? Whitmore asked immediately. Jasmine glanced at Gregory, then back at Whitmore. I want to open a free program for students of color, underrepresented kids. For those who've been underestimated, like I once was. Whitmore hesitated. That would require approval. No. Jasmine's voice was soft, but unwavering. Either all of it, or none at all. Madame Dubois stepped forward, resting a hand on Jasmine's shoulder. If they don't approve, I'll resign and follow you. Whitmore inhaled deeply. Fine, I will propose it. Thank you, Dr. Whitmore, Jasmine said. Gregory watched them, wide-eyed. You're really going to teach us not just me, but kids. Nobody believes in. Jasmine bent down, meeting his gaze. Yes, Serin, because music, it doesn't care about color, status, or background. It only needs a heart willing to listen. Gregory grinned and suddenly threw his arms around her. Thank you? Thank you. Outside the room, a few professors passed by, sneaking glances inside. Some nodded with curiosity and respect. A few murmured quietly. Looks like there's still magic in the world. Jasmine looked up at the high, vaulted ceiling, watching sunlight spill through stained glass. She whispered softly, just for herself. 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. It was all waiting for this moment. And she knew this return wasn't about reclaiming lost glory. It was about planting a light for the next generation. A new journey had only just begun. The echoes of polite yet tentative applause still lingered in the concert hall as Jasmine stepped away from the wings, leaving behind the sound that wasn't merely applause. It was the first tremor of an emotional storm beginning to swell inside her. She walked briskly down the corridor, her soft shoes tapping lightly against the floor, her face calm and composed. But deep within her eyes, a strange light had ignited. The dressing room door closed softly behind her. Jasmine leaned back against the wall, closed her eyes, and placed a hand over her chest, feeling the fierce rhythm of her heartbeat. Don't be afraid, not anymore, she whispered to herself. The door burst open. Gregory Palmer appeared, his face still pale after the backstage panic earlier. His eyes were swirling with shame, disappointment, and quiet gratitude. Jasmine, Gregory's voice was hushed. I don't know what to say. If it weren't for you, I would have. Greg, Jasmine cut him off gently but firmly. You owe me nothing. You dared to step up there, even when you were terrified, even when your hands wouldn't listen. That was already brave enough. Gregory bit his lip, lowering his gaze. But I failed. They wanted perfection, and his voice faltered. No one's perfect the first time. Jasmine stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. But you have something no professor here can teach. Heart. Gregory looked up, his eyes glimmering with a newfound hope. But the moment was interrupted by hurried footsteps in the hallway. The door swung open again. Dr. Whitmore and Madame Dubois entered, their faces tense. Behind them were 2 board members, their eyes filled with curiosity. Jasmine Walker. Doctor, Whitmore called, her voice clipped, urgent. We need you. Now and when I won't. What's happened? Professor Jasmine asked calmly. There's a problem with tonight's program, Madame Dubois said, her tone low but strained. The headliner canceled last minute. We have no one left to perform. Then, who's going to play Jasmine frowned. I can't believe I'm saying this. Doctor, Whitmore's eyes flickered with inner conflict. But you're the only option left. The room fell into stunned silence. Gregory's eyes widened. But she's just an assistant. Madame Dubois shook her head softly. No, child. She's not just an assistant. Her gaze fixed on Jasmine, as though peeling away years of quiet disguise. Jasmine, Dubois continued, her voice solemn. Are you the same Jasmine Walker, the international competition winner from 10 years ago? A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Gregory's mouth hung open. Doctor, Whitmore took an unconscious step back, visibly shaken. Jasmine took a deep breath. I used to be, she admitted evenly, firmly. But I left the stage after my mother's accident. I didn't dare come back. Silence. Ikanapuman. Thick and heavy. Doctor, Whitmore swallowed hard, then spoke almost pleading. We need you. The hall is packed with sponsors. If we cancel this concert, every funding opportunity will vanish. Jasmine looked down at her hands. Those slender fingers, once her pride, once her pain, now twitched softly as if remembering the keys. She raised her head. Her eyes burned bright. All right, she said. Emma, I'll play. Gregory held his breath. Madame Dubois smiled faintly. Doctor Whitmore nodded quickly and turned to hurry off. Now it was just Jasmine and Gregory in the room. Gregory stared at her, awe filling every inch of him. You're not just anyone. You're a living legend. Jasmine smiled softly. No, Greg. I'm just a lover of music, and it's time for that music to be heard. She turned, the door swinging open. Light from the concert hall streamed onto her face. Her footsteps steady, Jasmine walked forward, toward the spotlight, toward the fate waiting for her. They waited. The murmurs in the hall quieted as the lights dimmed, leaving only a soft glow illuminating the grand piano at center stage. The backstage door creaked open, and Jasmine Walker stepped out, wearing a simple deep blue dress, her hair tied neatly in a high bun. Her steps were steady yet graceful as she walked into the center of it all. The audience stirred. Sponsors, professors, and students exchanged glances. Some recognized the young black woman who had once quietly arranged sheet music and wiped down the piano keys. Now, she stood before them alone. In the front row, Dr. Whitmore gripped the arms of her chair. Madame Dubois closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer. Gregory stood just beyond the wings, heart pounding like a drum. And in a distant corner, a renowned critic had begun scribbling notes, his gaze skeptical. Jasmine sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, rested her hands on her knees. A deep breath, torso wrong. Silence swept the hall. Then, her hands lifted to the keys. A single note rang out low, firm, like a bell tolling from the depths. Then the opening of Liszt's transcription of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony burst forth, filling the room. Powerful, fierce, yet tender and precise. The layers of sound cascade like waves. They had expected a last-minute substitute performance of Patchwork Fix. But what they heard was a storm. Jasmine's fingers danced across the keys as if they'd been born for this. Not a stumble, not a faltering rhythm. The most rapid, intricate passages weren't merely accurate, they were alive. Thunderous chords, delicate whispers, every phrase infused with a soulfulness that left the hall holding its breath. Madame Dubois opened her eyes, gazing at the stage, whispering, "Oh my God, it's her. It's Jasmine Walker, the forgotten gem." Dr. Whitmore leaned forward unconsciously, wide-eyed. The sponsors, those who usually cared more for reputation and profit, sat utterly still. No phones in hand, no side conversations. And Gregory, he stood frozen in the wings, his eyes shining with both awe and regret. "She's the reason I ever chose piano," he murmured. The music surged higher. At the peak, Jasmine closed her eyes. She didn't need to see the keys. Every note had long been etched into her bones. Every pulse, every resonance was a heartbeat. And the audience felt it, a presence beyond explanation, beyond words, only heard by the soul. The piano roared, soared, then gently softened. The final chords rang out like a farewell, dissolving into the air. As the last note faded, Jasmine opened her eyes. A pause, a heartbeat. Then, the hall erupted. Thunderous applause, rising, swelling. The students were the first to stand. Then the professors, the sponsors, and soon, everyone, on their feet, a standing ovation that refused to end. Jasmine bowed, tears shimmering in her eyes. She had won not just against prejudice, not just against fear, but against herself. Backstage, Gregory shouted, overwhelmed. "She did it. She did it." Madame Dubois dabbed her eyes. Dr. Whitmore stood with a hand over her heart, disbelief and wonder mingling in her gaze. A sponsor stepped forward, speaking into the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, we didn't just find a talent. We witnessed a legend come home." Jasmine looked out across the hall, nodded, and smiled a quiet, peaceful smile. She knew, from this moment on, everything would be different. The applause still echoed through the hall as Jasmine Walker bowed once more, thanking the audience. But inside her, a storm of emotions was swirling. After years of being overlooked, dismissed, pushed to the margins, tonight, she stood in the spotlight, proving that talent didn't need anyone's permission to shine. It only needed her belief in herself. Backstage, Dr. Whitmore remained frozen, pale, his face a portrait of shock. He couldn't fathom what he'd just witnessed. The ordinary assistant they'd assigned to menial tasks had just conquered a legendary piece before the most critical ears. Madame Dubois, on the other hand, wore a gentle smile. "I knew it," she murmured, eyes glistening with admiration. "Some talents cannot stay hidden forever." Jasmine stepped down from the stage, her breath still catching, her palms still warm with the lingering thrill. Gregory Palmer waited at the wings, his eyes shining. Who are you, really?" "Jasmine," he asked, voice trembling with awe and disbelief. Jasmine smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Just someone who loves music, like you." It was a humble answer, yet her gaze carried a depth Gregory had never seen in any professor. Suddenly, Dr. Whitmore strode over, his voice sharp, laced with frustration. "You deceived us," he accused, trying to steady his voice. "You knew you could play, yet you kept it hidden. Do you realize the position you put this institution in?" Jasmine met his gaze, fearless. "If I'd told you from the start, would you have believed me?" she asked, her tone calm but cutting. "Or would you have dismissed me too? Thought I was delusional?" She stepped closer. "Tonight, I didn't just play for the audience. I played for myself. For every year I was ignored. For every time I was told I didn't belong." Professor Thornton stepped forward, his voice quieter. "Miss Walker, no. Jasmine, you saved us tonight. None of us can deny that." He lowered his head, a rare gesture of respect. From across the room, Madame Dubois approached, pride shining in her eyes. "If you're willing, Jasmine, I'd like you to serve as a guest artist here. Inspire the next generation. Share your music, your story, with those who need it most." Jasmine paused, surprised. After years of running, here was a door open again this time, on her own terms. Gregory clenched his fists eagerly. "You'll say yes, won't you? Jasmine, we need someone like you." Jasmine looked at him, then back toward the hall, where the applause had faded but its echo still resonated in her chest. "I need to think about it," she said honestly. "Music used to be my refuge. Now I need to know if I'm ready to make it my path, or if it's still just my shelter." Madame Dubois nodded gently, no pressure in her expression. "I understand, but know this. Antiquaires, the door will stay open until you're ready to walk through." A voice called from behind. "Jasmine Walker, sur mum." She turned. An elderly man with silver hair stepped forward from the guests. "Mr. Danson, the evening's largest sponsor." "Thank you," he said warmly. "Your performance didn't just salvage tonight. It reminded me why I loved music in the first place. The Danson Foundation will double its funding for this conservatory, on one condition." The air seemed to be still. Jasmine tilted her head. "What condition, Mr.?" Danson smiled softly. "That you agree to teach at least one special class." The room held its breath. Jasmine's lips curled into a quiet smile, a warmth blooming in her chest. "A special class," she repeated. "Yes, Mr." Danson nodded. "For the ones nobody expects. The ones like you." Jasmine inhaled deeply. Years of hiding. Years of longing for recognition. And now this moment. But this time, no one is dictating. No one is denying. Just her and the piano. A week after that unforgettable night, the atmosphere at Robertson Conservatory had completely transformed. The hallways where Jasmine Walker once quietly wiped piano keys and stacked sheet music were now filled with admiring, curious, and respectful glances. People whispered her name not as the invisible black assistant, but as Jasmine Walker, the artist who made the entire hall stand and applaud for 10 straight minutes. In her office now, bearing a new plaque. Artist in residence. Jasmine Walker. She sat thoughtfully before a small grand piano personally brought in by Madame Dubois. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, but she didn't play. Her fingers still remembered every note's path, but her heart was searching for a new melody, a turn after a long, winding journey. A soft knock came at the door. It was Gregory, clutching a bundle of sheet music, his face glowing. I just finished practicing the Allegro, he said eagerly. Could you listen? Jasmine smiled and nodded. Gregory sat at the piano, his hands trembling slightly, but his eyes shone with determination. He began to play, each note emerging both tentative and full of longing. Jasmine listened not just to the sound, but to the story his soul was trying to tell through each keystroke. When he finished, she clapped softly, her smile warm. You've grown, she said gently. But remember, Gregory, don't play to please others. Play to tell your story. Gregory nodded, eyes wide with inspiration. Thanks to you, he whispered. I believe I do have a story to tell. A sweet silence hung between them until Madame Dubois stepped in, her gaze tender yet resolute. Jasmine, have you thought it over, she asked. About Mr. Danson's offer. Jasmine looked at her, then at Gregory. I've thought about it, she said slowly. And I'll accept, but on one condition. What condition? Madame Dubois asked. I want that special class, not just for the best students, Jasmine said, but for the kids. No one expects. The ones like I once was poor, underestimated, overlooked. Madame Dubois' smile broadened. I've been waiting for that answer. News of Jasmine's decision spread quickly across the conservatory. On the opening day of the special class, not only were conservatory students in attendance, but children from underserved neighborhoods, wide-eyed, stepped into a world they'd never dreamed they'd touch. Jasmine stood at the front of the room, gazing at them. In her eyes, there were no outsiders, only souls waiting to be awakened by music. She sat at the piano and began to play the first piece. Not Liszt, not Beethoven, but a simple, heartfelt melody, a musical invitation. Children, believe you deserve to be heard. The music swirled around the room, dissolving the line between child prodigy and unknown kid. Gregory watched her, gratitude shining in his eyes. Madame Dubois stood quietly, blinking back tears. Outside, Professor Whitmore paused in the hallway, listening. His face softened for the first time in years. He sighed, shook his head gently, and walked away in silence. Inside that room, Jasmine Walker was no longer the girl dismissed, no longer the one hiding from her past. She was fully herself, whole, powerful. As the last note faded, every eye remained fixed on her. Jasmine looked at them, smiled, and said, music isn't a contest of who's better. Music is a bridge, right away, and from now on, we'll build those bridges together. The applause rose, not thunderous like performance night, but the applause of hope, of dreams newly planted. Outside the window, the sunset bathed the sky in gold and crimson. A new chapter had begun, and Jasmine knew, this time, she wouldn't walk it alone. If you've ever been underestimated, ever overlooked, remember, your true worth isn't in how others see you. It's in how you see yourself. Share your story in the comments. Hit like, subscribe, and let's spread these stories of hope. Because the world needs more bridges and you are the one building them.